Now, it's been a big day in federal politics with debates about fuel shortages. We're seeing diesel shortages in Texas, and Mooloolaba trawlers are saying they're low on diesel too. Australia is deploying resources to the Middle East, and this afternoon the leader of the Nationals, David Littleproud, quit the leadership. To talk through all of this is the federal member for Fisher, Mr Wallace. Good afternoon, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Caitlin. Good afternoon to your listeners.
Thanks so much for coming on. Now, just this afternoon, it's been breaking news. What's your reaction to David Littleproud resigning as the leader of the Nationals?
Well, look, I watched the press conference and clearly, as David said, that he's had enough as the leader. He's tired. He's obviously pretty spent and, I wish him well into the future. What
do you think it means for the National Party and the coalition?
Look, I have no doubt that the National Party will elect amongst their own a leader, and we'll continue to work with them as we work together in coalition.
Now, we're seeing, there's been some fuel problems in, particularly with producers out west and also trawlers off Mooloolaba. The Minister for Energy, Chris Bowen, and the RACQ says there's not a fuel shortage in Australia. Could the diesel shortages we're seeing happen because of panic buying?
Well, I think there's certainly an element of that, but at the end of the day, Chris Bowen last week in Parliament on 2 or 3 occasions talked about this and said that, Australia has 34 days of fuel and that there was no problem. And yet yesterday I was rung by one of my local fishing companies, Walker Seafoods, who have one of the largest fresh-caught tuna businesses and quotas on the east coast of Australia, and they said that they could not get fuel at all on the Mooloolaba Wharfs, nothing. I spoke to them at length. I spoke to a number of other suppliers, and it's very, very different to being able to pull up to a service station and put fuel in your four-wheel drive at a Mooloolaba service station. We're talking about fuel on the wharfs for fishing vessels. It's obviously a very different thing, but the reality is what we're seeing is, and this is not just fishing vessels in Mooloolaba, we're seeing this across the agriculture sector around the country, that wholesalers seem to be favouring the supply of liquid fuels to retail outlets, the large retail outlets, at the expense of small independents, and also, if I can call them boutique providers like, what we're seeing on the wharves and in agriculture sector. So the smaller users, if you can call them smaller by comparison, they're the ones that are suffering. And at the end of the day, where Chris Bowen is standing up and saying there's no problem here, and I've got a situation where 50 businesses on the Mooloolaba Wharfs are going to be impacted by the fact that those boats can't go to sea and fish. Clearly, Chris Bowen needs to do something, and the first thing he needs to do is recognise that there's a problem, and he's not doing that. He's saying everything's all tickety-boo, there's no problem to see.
Yeah, we will speak to the RACQ later about what they think is happening with the supply problems there, with particularly out in Texas and also on the Mooloolaba Wharves. I mean, what do you think needs to change about the way fuel security operates in Australia, in your view? Do we need onshore refineries? Like, what are practical things that you think should change?
Well, I actually led an inquiry in relation to this issue when I was the Defence subcommittee chair going back a few years ago now. And what we need to be doing is ensuring that we have greater ability in Australia to refine fuel. We still do have the ability to be able to extract oil around Australia. It's albeit those stocks are diminishing. We still have that capability, but what we don't have is capability to refine or diminishing capability. We only have 2 refineries left in Australia, and the only reason we have 2 left now is because Angus Taylor put provisions in place to protect those 2 when he was the Energy Minister. So this is a real problem, not just for our farmers and our fishermen. Obviously, it's a problem for the entire country. If we can't provide diesel and other liquid fuel stocks, whether it be jet fuel or petrol. This is a national security issue. And if we are totally or almost totally reliant upon getting our liquid fuel stocks from overseas in tankers, one thing that COVID should have taught this government is that we have to be able to be more self-sufficient than what we are. And that's very, very evident in a world which is so unstable. We've got a land war in Europe. We've got a hot war going on in the Middle East. The last thing that Australia needs is a situation where, for instance, we could be blockaded, where we can't get liquid fuels into this country. If we don't learn these lessons, we are in all sorts of strife.
You're listening to the federal member for Fisher, Andrew Wallace. Now, Andrew, today Australia is deploying an E-7 Wedgetail aircraft to the United Arab Emirates along with 85 personnel. The government will also provide the UAE with medium-range air-to-air missiles. Do you agree with deploying those resources to the Middle East?
Look, I think it's important that we play a part in protecting our people that are over in the Middle East. We have over 115,000 Australians that are residing in the Middle East. I think it's important that we are providing some degree of protection for them and also our allies like the United Arab Emirates that are a good ally to us. I do think that the government has to answer a few questions in relation to the security of the personnel, not just on board the Wedgetail, but the 85 personnel that not only crewing it, but that are supporting it. It's going into a hot war. These early warning aircraft do stand off from the conflict to some extent, but we know that Iran is firing indiscriminately to all of its neighbours and trying to cause mayhem. So I just don't think that there is a safe space in the airspace or on land anywhere near the Middle East at the moment. And I think that the government owes it not only to the personnel, but it owes it to their families and Australians to know what defensive mechanisms are being put in place to protect that crew and the ground crew as well. In relation to the air-to-air missiles, I have some concerns around that insofar as, well, what is the compatibility between the missiles that we are providing? What are the delivery mechanisms that those missiles will be fired? Are they compatible? And very importantly, how much are we providing to this mission when our own missile stocks are so hopelessly, terribly low now? Are we leaving ourselves significantly under-resourced if and when we expend this? Now, bearing in mind, there's been 1,500 interceptions into the UAE alone from missiles and drones fired from Iran. That would certainly, in no doubt, deplete if we saw those sort of numbers being fired. We don't know how many we are sending over, but what impact would that have on our already depleted stocks here in Australia?
Yeah, so you're saying we don't have that many of our own. Do you know how big the stockpile is?
Well, our stocks are very modest in Australia, and that's why the government has been so at pains to point out that it's trying to develop its own sovereign capability in building and manufacturing missiles here in Australia. It has utterly failed in that regard to date. They keep talking about how they're going to do this, but the sovereign missile capability in this country is non-existent. They talk about it, but we're not seeing the delivery of it. And at the end of the day, when you look at how long it actually takes to purchase missiles from the United States or whether it be from a European country, these things take years by the time you order them and actually receive them. They're not made overnight.
Yeah, it's not an eBay order.
It's not an eBay order. They literally take years. And what impact will Australia's expenditure of air-to-air missiles overseas, how will that impact on our ability to defend ourselves here?
You're listening to the federal member for Fisher, Andrew Wallace. Now, we've heard from international legal scholars, Andrew, who have said that the war could be illegal given that the US and Israel were in talks with Iran when it was attacked. Should Australia be pushing back on support for this conflict?
No, look, I think I will support the government's position on this. I think that the government, whilst the government haven't come out and said that they think it's legal, the Prime Minister and Penny Wong have consistently said that, those are questions that are best left answered to Israel and the United States. The United States and Israel has a fundamental right to defend itself, and where Israel was significantly at risk, the intelligence that is coming out from Iran is that they were close to developing nuclear weapons, and we saw the operation last year with Midnight Hammer, where the United States attacked Iran and purportedly significantly damaged their ability to be able to manufacture these weapons of mass destruction. The US believed that the US believed that Iran was very close within a matter of weeks to having developed that capability.
Do we trust that intel? Because the US did bomb...
We've heard that before, haven't we?
Iran in 2025, and,
yep.
They were bombing their nuclear facilities. Do we trust this intel that this is the reason why we should be involved in Iran?
Well, Australia is currently not involved in offensive measures against Iran. The measures that the Australian Defence Force have announced, or that the government's announced today, are defensive mechanisms for the UAE. But at the end of the day, I believe that that Israel and the United States are doing the heavy lifting for the Western world right now in trying to deplete a terrible theocratic regime in Iran that has treated women incredibly badly. We've seen that time and time again. I mean, this is a government in Iran that has killed somewhere between 30 and 50,000 of its own citizens just in the last month because they dared to rise up against the regime. Iranians want a return to democracy. By and large, they by their numbers, they want a return to democracy. Where there was a current and real and present threat to Israel and Europe and the United States, the United States and Israel had a lawful right to strike preemptively to prevent that threat from progressing.
We're just in an interesting situation where we're backing the US, who have gone into Venezuela. They've now involved in a war in Iran, and Trump is now threatening Cuba. How far does the friendship extend?
Well, I haven't heard the threats about Cuba, but at the end of the day, look, there's no doubt, Caitlin, that we are in a very a geostrategic situation in this world which is extremely dangerous. It is the most precarious situation the world has found itself in since 1945. As I said, we've got a land war that's going on in Europe and an illegal war that's being waged by Russia against Ukraine. We're now seeing a war going on in the Middle East, and nobody wants to see war for all the reasons which we understand, whether they be economic or just the simple fact of human beings being killed, particularly civilians. Hopefully, this war will be over in the Middle East as quickly as possible, because no one wants to see people killed or injured.
Andrew Wallace, really appreciate you making time for us this afternoon. Just final question: what do you think the coalition will need to do to win back supporters from One Nation? We have seen polling data that's showing that they are getting stronger. What do you think the coalition will need to do to turn it around?
Well, I think principally we need to return to our basic values, and we will, over the next 2 years, we will demonstrate to the Australian people that we want to protect Australians' way of life and restore their standard of living. There's no doubt that, in my view, that people are obviously doing it very, very tough right now. They are angry with the Albanese government. They believe that they've been sold a pup. They're angry at the Prime Minister, but they're also angry at the Liberal and National parties. I don't shy away from that. They're angry because for too long now, particularly since the 25 election, we've been concentrating on ourselves rather than being a united, viable alternative government. And Australians understand one thing, and that is a government is only as good, is only as strong as its opposition. And whilst we haven't been, as united as we should be, I think that the Australian people have been punishing the coalition as a result, and they've been saying that they want to put their vote somewhere else, and that's understandable. That is absolutely understandable. But over the next 2 years, and bearing in mind we've got 2 years to the next election, hopefully, we need to restore that faith in the Australian public that we are a viable opposition, we're a viable government. And I believe that we can do that. I believe we must do that, because at the end of the day, Australians will generally, they will back in a centre-right government, as they have done for many, many years since Federation. The Liberal and National parties are the most successful parties when it comes to forming government over the last 120-odd years. And it's I was going to say it's simply. It is a matter of us restoring the Australian people's faith in us once again.
Andrew Wallace, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Caitlin.
That is the federal member for Fisher, Andrew Wallace, live from Parliament House. It's been a huge day in politics today, and we appreciate him taking the time. You are listening to ABC Radio Queensland.
Authorised by Andrew Wallace, LNP, Boccarina, Queensland.